going to be showing you a stitch that a lot of people will call a hidden slip stitch. Other people just call that stitch I use to sew on my bindings. Other people might call it my hand applique stitch. But its traditional name is a hidden slip stitch. And this is the stitch that I use for hand applique and for putting on bindings. I generally use a Sharps needle, and that's what I've got here. It's a size 9. I used to use a size 11 or even a 12, which are smaller, even though the numbers are bigger. But my eyesight is, even with glasses these days, isn't really good enough to thread those puppies anymore. I'm actually going to put this on with my regular piecing thread, which is 50 weight cotton. And I've tied a knot at the end of my thread. So I'm going to be turning this facing, which is acting as a binding, at the same time that I'm stitching it. So a lot of times you're already going to have your edge turned, and other times you won't. And so I'm kind of showing you how to turn it and stitch it at the same time. So I'm going to turn a segment and hold it. Now the first thing I want you to notice is the direction of the quilt. The quilt is over here and the binding is in front of me, instead of the quilt being over here and the binding being away from me, okay? So the quilt is away from me, the binding is right next to me. This would be the same if I was appliquing down an edge. So if I was appliquing down an edge, the applique portion would be down here, and the background that I'm appliquing it on would be away from me. I'm going to bring the needle up underneath the binding and pull that knot all the way through. And I'm going to hold that turned edge down with my non-dominant thumb. And that's important that you hold it down with that thumb. And I'm going to take a stitch into the background or the backing of the quilt, angle it towards my thumb, and take the tiniest little bite. So you can see right here that I've taken a tiny little bite out of the edge of that binding. I'm going to push it all the way through and pull. Take another tiny little bite out of the backing of the quilt only, push towards my thumb, and take a tiny little bite out of the edge. Backing only, tiny little bite out of the edge, and pull all the way through. When you do this, what's happening is you're slipping that thread down into the batting, and you're really securing that thread well down underneath. You've got a long stitch length, but that long stitch length is under the backing. So again, down in the backing, angled towards my holding thumb, take a little bite out of the edge and pull. So I'm going to take a few more stitches and then I'm going to show you this. I could probably stitch this in bright red thread and you wouldn't be able to see it. I happen to be stitching it in a gray, even though my fabric that I'm stitching through is a kind of a violet. But I didn't really have that color thread, so the gray was the closest thing. Gray will kind of meld into almost anything. And once you get your rhythm down, this will start to go really, really fast, and you'd be amazed at how fast you can whip stitch down a piece of applique or a binding, and how kind of meditative it is. I generally work with a piece of thread that's about 18 inches, not longer, because I don't like it getting tangled up. So I've stitched from about here to here, and when I turn that up here, you can't even see the thread on the edge. All you can see is where I took the little bite out of the edge. And that's what we're looking for. We can't see our thread at all. It looks like the binding was kind of magically applied. And that's what a judge looks for, and that's what anybody who's looking at the quality of your workmanship is going to look for. But most importantly, because I really don't care what other people think, I've got a really secure binding put on there. And if I'm hand appliquing, I've got a really secure edge to my hand applique, and it can handle laundering and being touched and pulled on and yanked on and all that stuff. And so that's how you do a hidden stitch, a hidden slip stitch for your bindings or for hand applique.